Dr. Ethan Blackwood had spent most of his academic career studying dead civilizations, so working in the Stellar Archive on Valdris Prime felt like being given the keys to the universe's greatest museum. The massive crystalline structure housed the collected knowledge of 43 extinct civilizations, each level devoted to a different species' contribution to galactic history. For a xenolinguist specializing in ancient poetry and cultural texts, it was paradise with a really complicated filing system. Remember, Dr. Sarah Chen had warned him during orientation, the Sylvani take their cultural preservation very seriously. Stick to your assigned materials, don't wander into restricted sections, and whatever you do, don't touch anything marked with royal seals. Ethan had nodded dutifully, though his eyes had already been drawn to the towering shelves of manuscripts that stretched beyond his ability to count. 3 weeks into his research fellowship, he'd managed to translate 17 different sets of mundane trade agreements and was beginning to understand why some of his colleagues found archival work tedious. The breakthrough came on a Thursday that started like any other. Ethan was working his way through a collection of administrative documents from the Third Sylvani dynasty when he discovered a storage container that had been misfiled among the bureaucratic records. Inside were fragments of manuscripts so old that the crystalline storage medium had begun to deteriorate, leaving gaps and tears that made the texts nearly impossible to read. "Interesting," he muttered, carefully examining one of the larger fragments under his translation equipment. The script was High Sylvani, but an archaic form that predated most of the texts in the archive's main collection. More intriguingly, the fragments weren't administrative documents or historical records, they were poetry. Ethan had always been drawn to the artistic expressions of ancient civilizations. While his colleagues focused on political documents and technological records, he believed that poetry revealed more about a species' true nature than any military history or trade agreement. These fragments spoke of themes that transcended species, loss, hope, the weight of responsibility, and the terrible loneliness of those who carried entire civilizations on their shoulders. Across the void between stars, he read aloud, translating as he worked, "We carry the dreams of 10 billion souls, and in the silence of space, we remember what it means to bear the weight of eternity." The fragments were beautiful, but they were also damaged almost beyond recognition. Sections were missing, words were incomplete, and entire verses had been lost to time. For most scholars, they would have represented an interesting but ultimately incomplete discovery. For Ethan, they represented a puzzle that demanded solving. He spent the next 2 weeks developing a reconstruction methodology that combined comparative linguistics with historical context analysis. By studying poetic patterns from similar periods and cross-referencing cultural themes from contemporary sources, he began filling in the gaps. The work was painstaking, requiring intuitive leaps that most academic institutions would have considered unscientific, but Ethan had always trusted his instincts about language and meaning. The reconstructed poems were extraordinary. They spoke of cosmic loneliness, the burden of immortal rule, and the price of carrying an entire people's hopes across the darkness between stars. The voice that emerged from the ancient verses was both regal and achingly human, or whatever the Sylvani equivalent of human might be. In the quiet hours before dawn, one reconstructed passage read, "When the weight of the crown becomes too heavy for mortal shoulders, we remember that even stars burn out eventually, and wonder if our light will be remembered when the darkness comes." Ethan found himself working late into the archive's night cycle, driven by a compulsion he couldn't entirely explain. The fragments seemed to call to him, each restored verse revealing new depths of meaning and emotion. He began to feel a strange connection to the anonymous author, as if the ancient ruler's thoughts were reaching across centuries to find expression through his work. What Ethan didn't realize was that the crystalline storage medium used for these particular manuscripts was unlike anything else in the archive. The fragments he was reconstructing weren't just records of ancient poetry. They were pieces of the sacred codex, verses written by the first Sylvani rulers using techniques that embedded consciousness itself into language. The texts were considered so holy that only those of royal blood were permitted to read them, and the idea of a non-Sylvani not only reading but recreating them was beyond blasphemy. It was theoretically impossible. But theory had never stopped Ethan Blackwood from pursuing truth, and as he worked late into another night, carefully reconstructing verses that spoke to something deep in his academic soul, he remained blissfully unaware that he was committing what Sylvani law considered the greatest sacrilege possible. The ancient words flowed through his translations like music, each restored line bringing him closer to understanding a mind that had ruled an empire while grappling with the fundamental loneliness of absolute power. Somewhere in the crystalline depths of the archive, security systems designed to monitor access to restricted materials remained silent, their sensors confused by the unique nature of Ethan's work. After all, how could they detect unauthorized access to materials that were supposed to be impossible for anyone but royalty to understand? As Ethan completed another verse and felt the strange resonance that came with each successful reconstruction, he had no way of knowing that his academic passion had just created a situation that would challenge everything both his species and the Sylvani understood about destiny, bloodlines, and the power of words to transcend the boundaries of time and biology. In 3 days, Queen Lyralii Velthana would arrive for her annual inspection of the archive, and Ethan's impossible reconstruction work would transform a routine administrative visit into the most significant cultural crisis in Sylvani history. But for now, he simply worked, driven by the inexplicable certainty that these ancient words needed to be preserved, and that somehow, he was meant to be the one to save them from the silence of eternity. Queen Lyralii Velthana had ruled the Sylvani Empire for 347 years, and in all that time, she had never encountered anything that made her question the fundamental nature of reality. That changed the moment she walked into Section 7 of the Stellar Archive and saw her ancestors' words reproduced with impossible accuracy by someone who shouldn't have been able to read them at all. "Your Majesty," Dr. Chen said nervously, leading the Queen's inspection party through the human research areas, "our scholars have been making excellent progress on their assigned projects. Trade agreements, administrative records, standard historical documentation." Queen Lyralii barely heard her. Her attention was fixed on a workstation where manuscript fragments were displayed alongside what appeared to be reconstruction work. But these weren't just any fragments. They were pieces of text she recognized, verses that had been burned into her memory through the sacred mental communion that transferred royal knowledge from ruler to heir. The Queen approached the workstation slowly, her pointed ears shifting to their alert position as she read the translations displayed on the human's equipment. The verses were perfect, not just accurate, but complete in ways that even she had begun to forget over the centuries. "Through the endless night of space, we carry light that is not our own," she read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "In the silence between heartbeats, we remember the names of all who came before, and in the weight of their expectations, we find the strength to carry on. Your Majesty." Dr. Chen looked confused by the Queen's sudden stillness. "Is there a problem with the research materials?" Queen Lyralii's voice, when it came, shook the crystalline walls of the archive. "Who wrote this?" The human researchers in the section froze, their conversation stopping mid-sentence as the Queen's fury filled the space around them. Her royal guards moved into protective positions while Dr. Chen stumbled over explanations that made no sense. "I don't understand, Your Majesty. These are just translation exercises, historical documents that were assigned for." "These are not historical documents," the Queen interrupted, her amber eyes blazing with an intensity that made the humans instinctively step back. "These are sacred verses from the Royal Codex, texts that have been restricted to the royal bloodline for over 2 millennia. She held up one of the reconstruction pages, her hand trembling with either rage or something else entirely. "These words exist nowhere in the public archives. They were never written down in any form accessible to scholars. Yet here they are, reproduced with perfect accuracy by someone who should not even be able to comprehend their meaning." The archive fell silent except for the subtle harmonics of the crystalline structure itself. Human researchers looked at each other with growing alarm while Sylvani archivists began backing away from the workstation as if it contained something contagious. "I ask again," Queen Lyralii said, her voice carrying the authority of absolute power and barely contained confusion, "who wrote this?" The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. Then, from the back of the group, a figure stepped forward with the slow, deliberate movement of someone who understood that their next words might determine whether they lived or died. Dr. Ethan Blackwood raised his hand like a student answering a question in class. "I did, Your Majesty." The Queen stared at him as if he had just claimed to be capable of breathing vacuum. Her expression cycled through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been recognition before settling on a kind of stunned confusion that no one in the archive had ever seen on the face of their immortal ruler. "You," she said slowly, "are human." "Yes, Your Majesty." "You have no Sylvani blood, no connection to our royal line, no access to the sacred mental communion that preserves these texts." "No, Your Majesty." "Yet you have somehow reconstructed verses that exist only in the private memories of rulers, words that have never been recorded in any archive or database." Ethan looked around at the faces surrounding him, humans confused and frightened, Sylvani archivists horrified by what they were witnessing, royal guards who appeared to be calculating the most efficient way to eliminate a potential threat to their queen's sanity. "I found fragments," he said carefully. "Damaged manuscripts that had been misfiled among administrative documents. I used comparative linguistics and historical context to fill in the missing sections." "Show me," Queen Lyralii commanded. For the next hour, Ethan walked the Queen through his reconstruction methodology while the most powerful woman in the galaxy examined his work with the intensity of someone whose entire worldview was being challenged. She tested him by reciting incomplete lines from the sacred codex, and to everyone's amazement, he completed them with perfect accuracy. In the hour before dawn, when shadows grow long and hope grows thin, the Queen began. "We remember that darkness is not the absence of light, but the canvas upon which light creates meaning," Ethan finished without hesitation. The Queen's amber eyes widened. That particular verse had never been written down anywhere. It existed only in the mental communion between rulers, passed from mind to mind across generations. "Impossible," she breathed. "Your Majesty, Dr. Chen interjected nervously, "perhaps there's a scientific explanation. Convergent translation, or statistical probability in linguistic reconstruction." "Dr. Chen," the Queen said without taking her eyes off Ethan, "this man has just recited words that I learned directly from my predecessors' memories, verses that were composed by rulers who died centuries before your species developed written language." She stepped closer to Ethan, studying his face as if looking for some sign of deception or supernatural influence. "There are only two explanations for what you have accomplished. Either you are lying about your methodology and have somehow gained access to restricted royal archives." "I'm not lying," Ethan said quietly. "Or," the Queen continued, "you have somehow become connected to the consciousness embedded in the sacred codex itself." The archive fell silent again as everyone present tried to process the implications of what the Queen was suggesting. The idea that a human scholar could tap into ancient Sylvani consciousness through pure academic work challenged every assumption about the nature of royal bloodlines, sacred texts, and the barriers between species. "Your Majesty," one of the royal guard said carefully, "perhaps we should continue this discussion in a more secure environment." Queen Lyralii looked around at the crowd of witnesses, at the evidence of impossible scholarship scattered across Ethan's workstation, and at the human who had somehow bridged a gap that was supposed to be unbridgeable. "Dr. Blackwood," she said formally, "you will accompany me to the royal chambers for further discussion of your research methods." As royal guards surrounded Ethan and the Queen prepared to leave the archive, she paused to look back at the reconstructed verses displayed on his equipment. For just a moment, her expression softened into something that might have been wonder. 300 years, she said quietly, and I thought I knew everything there was to know about the sacred codex. She looked at Ethan with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. "It seems the universe still has surprises for those who rule it." The royal chambers of Queen Lyralii Velthana were both exactly what Ethan had expected and nothing like what he'd imagined. The crystalline walls rose to impossible heights, carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow in the changing light. Ancient artifacts from across the galaxy occupied places of honor, while holographic displays showed the current status of worlds under Sylvani protection. But what struck Ethan most was the overwhelming sense of solitude that permeated the space, the loneliness of someone who had ruled alone for centuries. "Sit," the Queen commanded, gesturing to a chair that was clearly designed for someone of her species' proportions. Ethan settled into the oversized seat while Queen Lyralii paced in front of floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the capital city of Valdris Prime. Her movements carried the restless energy of someone grappling with concepts that challenged everything they thought they knew about reality. Dar. Blackwood, she began without looking at him, in my 3 centuries of rule, I have encountered phenomena that would drive most beings to madness. I have communed with the consciousness of dying stars, negotiated with entities that exist in dimensions beyond normal perception, and maintained mental links with the accumulated memories of 57 previous rulers. She turned to face him, her amber eyes reflecting depths that spoke of experiences beyond human comprehension. But I have never encountered anything quite like what you demonstrated in the archive today. Your Majesty, Ethan said carefully, I understand that my reconstruction work has violated cultural taboos, but I assure you that my intentions were purely academic. Dr. Blackwood, the Queen interrupted, you completed a verse that exists only in my personal memories. Not in any archive, not in any record, not even in the communal consciousness shared among my bloodline. That verse was composed by Queen Velnara III during a moment of private contemplation, and she chose never to record it because she considered it too personal for preservation. Ethan felt the world shift around him. That's impossible. I reconstructed it from linguistic patterns and historical context. Show me how. For the next 2 hours, Ethan demonstrated his reconstruction methodology while Queen Lyralii watched with the intensity of someone whose entire understanding of reality was being challenged. He explained comparative analysis, showed her the pattern recognition software he'd developed, and walked her through the intuitive leaps that had led to his successful translations. This is the fragment I started with, he said, displaying a badly damaged section of text. Using contextual analysis and poetic structure patterns, I determined that the missing words needed to carry themes of cosmic responsibility and personal sacrifice. And this led you to the exact words that Queen Velnara composed in private? Apparently, yes. Though I still don't understand how that's possible. Queen Lyralii was quiet for a long moment, studying the fragments and reconstructions with an expression that mixed scientific curiosity with something approaching awe. Dr. Blackwood, what did you feel when you were reconstructing these verses? Feel. Emotions, sensations, impressions that weren't your own. Ethan considered the question, remembering the strange compulsion that had driven him to work through the night, the sense of connection he'd felt with the anonymous ancient author. I felt, understood, I suppose. As if the words were trying to reach across time to find expression. And sometimes, while I was working, I felt profound loneliness, the weight of responsibility that seemed too heavy for anyone to bear alone. The Queen's expression grew thoughtful. Dar. Blackwood, I'm going to share something with you that violates several state secrets and could get us both executed for treason. The sacred codex was not written using conventional methods. I don't understand. The first Sylvani rulers discovered techniques for embedding consciousness itself into language. The verses you've been reconstructing aren't just records of thoughts and emotions, they're fragments of actual consciousness, preserved in crystalline storage medium and designed to awaken dormant memories in those capable of understanding them. Ethan stared at her. You're saying the texts are alive? I'm saying the texts contain the living memories and consciousness of the rulers who wrote them. When properly accessed, they create a mental link between the reader and the original author across time itself. But I'm not Sylvani. I shouldn't be able to access those memories. No, you shouldn't. Queen Lyralii moved to a wall display that showed the genealogical records of the royal bloodline. Which means either the fundamental laws governing consciousness and bloodline inheritance are wrong, or something unprecedented is happening here. She activated a holographic projector that filled the chamber with ancient Sylvani script. Recite this passage. Ethan looked at the symbols, feeling the strange resonance he'd experienced during his reconstruction work. Without understanding how he knew the words, he began to speak. From the void between worlds comes one who carries words like seeds, planting thoughts in fertile minds across the darkness of space. When the burden grows too heavy for royal shoulders alone, the cosmos will provide a voice to share the weight of eternity. Queen Lyraliai's face went pale. That passage is from the prophecies of First Contact, written by the founding dynasty over 2 millennia ago. It describes the coming of one who carries words like seeds who will help preserve royal knowledge across the boundaries of blood and species. Are you suggesting that I'm fulfilling some kind of ancient prophecy? I'm suggesting, the Queen said slowly, that your reconstruction work has created an unprecedented connection between human consciousness and the embedded memories of Sylvani rulers. Whether that's coincidence, destiny, or something else entirely remains to be determined. She moved to another display showing the complete text of the sacred codex. Dr. Blackwood, what you've accomplished should be impossible according to everything we understand about consciousness, genetics, and the nature of royal bloodlines. But the evidence suggests that somehow, through pure scholarly passion and linguistic sensitivity, you've become a bridge between ancient Sylvani consciousness and the present. Ethan looked at the vast collection of sacred texts, understanding beginning to dawn. The fragments I found weren't random documents. They were pieces of a larger whole, and by reconstructing them, I've somehow connected to the consciousness that created them. More than that. The ancient prophecies speak of a time when royal knowledge would need to be shared beyond bloodline boundaries to ensure the survival of galactic civilization. Your arrival and your unprecedented ability to access the sacred codex may represent the fulfillment of warnings and promises made centuries before your species even existed. The Queen turned to face him fully, her expression mixing wonder with uncertainty. Dr. Blackwood, I find myself in the unprecedented position of needing to decide whether you represent a cosmic miracle, a dangerous anomaly, or the fulfillment of ancient prophecy. What happens if it's the prophecy? Then we proceed very carefully, she said. Because if the ancient rulers were correct, your connection to the sacred codex isn't an accident, it's preparation for challenges that neither of our species is ready to face alone. As Ethan sat in the impossibly grand chamber of an immortal queen, surrounded by evidence that his academic passion had somehow transcended the boundaries of time and species, he realized that his simple translation project had become something far more significant than he'd ever imagined. And looking at Queen Lyraliai's expression of cautious hope mixed with ancient loneliness, he began to understand that maybe that was exactly what the universe had intended all along. 6 months after the discovery that would reshape the political and spiritual landscape of the Sylvani Empire, Dr. Ethan Blackwood stood in the newly constructed Chamber of Convergence, watching Queen Lyraliai prepare for the most important ceremony in their civilization's history. The crystalline hall had been designed specifically to house the complete sacred codex, with Ethan's reconstructed verses integrated alongside the preserved originals in a display that represented the marriage of ancient wisdom and unprecedented possibility. Are you ready for this? Queen Lyraliai asked, adjusting the ceremonial robes that marked her transition from absolute ruler to collaborative guardian of sacred knowledge. I don't think anyone could be ready for this, Ethan replied, looking out at the assembled crowd of Sylvani nobles, human diplomats, and scholars from dozens of species who had come to witness the formal establishment of the Codex guardianship. The first sharing of royal sacred knowledge in the Empire's history. The journey to this moment had been extraordinary. Working together over the past months, Ethan and Queen Lyraliai had unlocked layers of meaning in the sacred codex that even she hadn't fully understood. His human perspective, combined with his unique connection to the consciousness embedded in the texts, had revealed prophecies and wisdom that spoke directly to the challenges facing galactic civilization. The prophecies were more specific than we realized, Queen Lyraliai said, activating a holographic display that showed their latest translations. They don't just predict the coming of one who carries words like seeds, they describe a partnership between rulers that transcend species boundaries, designed to preserve knowledge and guide civilizations through periods of cosmic transition. Ethan studied the ancient verses they had decoded together, still amazed by the prescience of rulers who had lived millennia before humanity had reached the stars. They knew this would happen. Somehow, they knew that their knowledge would eventually need to be shared beyond Sylvani bloodlines. More than that. Look at this passage we translated last week. She highlighted a section of text that still gave Ethan chills whenever he read it. When the void stirs and ancient hungers wake, when the darkness between stars grows thick with malice, then shall wisdom cross the boundaries of blood and breath, that two minds might stand where one would fall. You think they were warning about something specific? I think they were preparing for something that hasn't happened yet, Queen Lyralei said seriously. The consciousness embedded in these texts carries memories and knowledge from rulers who experienced phenomena we can barely imagine. And their guidance suggests that our partnership is not just historically significant, it's preparation for challenges that require both human adaptability and Silvani wisdom to overcome. The ceremony began with traditional Silvani protocols that recognized the sacred nature of the texts being shared, but quickly evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history. Ethan's formal appointment as guardian of the sacred codex represented not just recognition of his unique abilities, but acknowledgement that some forms of knowledge transcended the boundaries of species and bloodline. Dr. Ethan Blackwood, Queen Lyralei announced to the assembled crowd, "You have demonstrated that consciousness and wisdom recognize no barriers of birth or biology. In accepting the role of Codex Guardian, you accept responsibility for preserving and interpreting sacred knowledge that belongs not to any single species, but to all who seek understanding." Ethan stepped forward, feeling the weight of history and the strange resonance that came whenever he worked with the ancient texts. "I accept this responsibility, and I pledge to honor the wisdom of those who came before while helping to guide those who come after." But the true significance of the ceremony came when they demonstrated their collaborative translation work. Together, Ethan and Queen Lyralei revealed prophecies that spoke of cosmic threats, galactic migrations, and the rise of consciousness-based technologies that would require unprecedented cooperation between species to master safely. "The ancient rulers saw farther than we realized," Queen Lyralei explained to the audience. They understood that the challenges facing advanced civilizations would eventually require pooled knowledge and shared wisdom. The sacred codex was designed not just to preserve Silvani culture, but to prepare for a time when that culture would need to merge with others to ensure survival. Ambassador Chen, representing Earth's interests, stepped forward with obvious curiosity. "Your Majesty, are you suggesting that this partnership has implications beyond academic collaboration?" "I'm suggesting," the Queen replied, "that the ancient prophecies described threats and opportunities that neither humanity nor the Silvani Empire can address alone." Dr. Blackwood's connection to the sacred codex appears to be preparation for challenges that require both human innovation and Silvani wisdom. Over the following weeks, their partnership deepened into something that transcended professional collaboration. Working together to decode the remaining mysteries of the sacred codex, Ethan and Queen Lyralei discovered shared perspectives on leadership, responsibility, and the cosmic forces that guided civilizations across the galaxy. "I've ruled alone for over 3 centuries, the Queen admitted during one of their late-night research sessions. The mental communion with previous rulers provides guidance, but it doesn't provide companionship. Partnership in the truest sense. And I've spent my career studying dead civilizations," Ethan replied, "trying to understand minds and cultures that existed long before I was born. But working with you, accessing the consciousness embedded in these texts, it's like having conversations across time itself." Their relationship became a model for the kind of interspecies cooperation that the ancient prophecies had envisioned. As word spread through diplomatic channels, other civilizations began requesting similar cultural exchange programs, hoping to unlock the wisdom preserved in their own ancient texts. "We've become proof of concept," Queen Lyralei observed with amusement. "Evidence that the barriers between species are more flexible than anyone imagined." "Is that what we are?" Ethan asked. "Proof of concept?" The Queen's expression grew serious. "We're whatever we choose to become, Ethan. The ancient prophecies provided the framework, but the relationship we build within that framework is entirely our own." As they stood together in the Chamber of Convergence, surrounded by the complete sacred codex and the evidence of their unprecedented collaboration, Ethan reflected on how far they traveled from that moment in the archive when he'd simply raised his hand and admitted to reconstructing forbidden texts. "Your Majesty," he said, using the formal address that had become a gentle joke between them, "what happens now? We've fulfilled the prophecies, established the guardianship, proven that consciousness can transcend bloodline boundaries. What comes next? Queen Lyralii smiled, gesturing toward the holographic displays that showed star maps marked with locations mentioned in the newly decoded prophecies. Now we prepare for whatever cosmic challenges the ancient rulers foresaw. And we do it together, as the prophecies intended. She paused, looking at him with an expression that mixed 3 centuries of accumulated wisdom with something much more immediate and personal. Besides, the sacred codex still holds mysteries we haven't unlocked. Spending eternity decoding them with the right partner doesn't sound like such a burden. As they turned back to their work, surrounded by the living memories of ancient rulers and the promise of discoveries yet to be made, Ethan realized that sometimes the most significant relationships began not with romance or political alliance, but with shared passion for understanding the impossible. "Ethan," Queen Lyralii said softly, activating a new section of the sacred codex that they hadn't yet explored, "there's something else the prophecies mention. Something about the consciousness bridge you've created." "What kind of something?" The ancient rulers believed that when the barriers between species consciousness were successfully breached, it would create possibilities they could only hint at. Enhanced understanding, shared perception, collaborative wisdom that transcends individual limitations. Ethan felt the familiar resonance as new verses appeared on their displays, but this time it was stronger, more complex. And for the first time, he realized that Queen Lyralii was experiencing the same sensations. The connection was no longer one-sided. "You can feel it too," he said, watching her amber eyes widen with recognition. "The consciousness bridge works both ways," she confirmed, wonder evident in her voice. "I'm beginning to access human perspectives, human ways of understanding that complement Sylvani wisdom." As they worked together, their minds increasingly aligned through the consciousness bridge created by the sacred codex. Ethan understood that their partnership had evolved into something the ancient prophecies had envisioned but never explicitly described, 2 minds functioning as one while maintaining their individual perspectives, human adaptability merged with immortal wisdom to create understanding that neither could achieve alone. "So this is what the ancient rulers meant by 2 minds might stand where one would fall," Ethan said, feeling Queen Lyralii's thoughts harmonizing with his own as they decoded prophecies that spoke of challenges still to come. "The universe," Queen Lyralii replied, her consciousness intertwining with his in ways that transcended species boundaries, apparently has a sense of humor about how it arranges these things. "How so?" "I spent 3 centuries believing that immortal rule meant eternal solitude." "And you spent your career studying dead civilizations because you felt disconnected from your own." Her mental voice carried warmth that physical words couldn't convey. "The cosmos arranged for us to find exactly what we were missing in the most impossible way imaginable." As they continued their work, their partnership deepened into something that was simultaneously intellectual collaboration, spiritual connection, and cosmic preparation for whatever challenges the ancient prophecies had foreseen. They had become living proof that consciousness recognized no boundaries of species or time, and that some relationships were written into the fabric of the universe itself, waiting for the right moment and the right individuals to bring them into existence. The sacred codex pulsed around them with the accumulated wisdom of millennia, but its most important lesson was being written in real time. That understanding, partnership, and the sharing of consciousness across impossible boundaries could create something greater than the sum of its parts. And in the crystalline chambers of Valdris Prime, surrounded by the living memories of ancient rulers and the promise of discoveries yet to be made, a human scholar and an immortal queen continued their work of proving that some connections transcend every barrier the universe can create.